and that it effectively overlaps onto or maps onto phase 3 of IFAC's plan. In the programme for government in that period, they talk about utilising taxation measures as well as expenditure measures in order to close the deficit. And in phase 3, IFAC talk about it as being a period of fiscal consolidation to bring the debt to GNI star ratio down. It seems to me IFAC is at pains to avoid describing this as a period of austerity, but I'd like to explore that further, because on the figures that are here, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to me there's many other conclusions available. So you make the point that the adjustment would be significantly less than that implemented after the 2008 crisis, but that's based on looking at the figures on a 7-year period post-2008 versus a 3-year period, 2023 to 2025. If you look at the figures on a year-on-year basis, and you look at the potential of what you say a 14 billion amount of adjustment between 2023 and 2025, actually that works out as a higher amount of fiscal consolidation, in layman's terms, I think, austerity, on a year-by-year basis than we had post-crisis. So you go on to say that this does not mean a return to severe austerity. I mean, we could debate the adjective. Later on, you say we do not expect austerity in the sense of significant increases in unemployment due to severe fiscal adjustments taking place in a downturn. I mean, you're saying it's not austerity, but then you're redefining austerity to be something that nobody defines austerity as. But could I ask just simply, austerity as defined by most people, economic measures to close deficits based on increasing taxation or decreasing public expenditure, that is really what you foresee happening in phase 3, 2023 to 2025. And actually on a year-by-year basis, you see it as coming in at a similar amount to the kind of year-by-year austerity that we saw from 2008 onwards.
So let me clarify. So what we mean by fiscal adjustment here is exactly that to close the deficit that would have opened up essentially because incomes are permanently lower, but consumption, even once things like stimulus are unwound, would be at a higher level. There would be a gap. In the central scenario, it's a deficit of 3%, and that gap would need to be closed essentially to get the debt to GNI star ratio back on the safer trajectory. So that would require either an increase in taxation or measures around spending. It wouldn't necessarily require spending cuts in nominal terms, but it could require, for example, freezing some forms of spending could contribute quite a lot to closing that gap. So that's what we mean. In terms of the precise figures, and this may be an imprecision on our part, so I apologize for that. We didn't meet. So we have 3 scenarios. I think the 3 years is more what we had in mind for the central scenario. I think if we were in the severe scenario, so where more adjustment is needed, which is still in aggregate a third of what was required in post-crisis, I think in that situation it wouldn't be over 3 years, it would be spread over a longer period. So I think over this period, so essentially we believe that if interest rates stay low, which creates a very favourable environment for this, if the economy by that point is essentially recovering and growing at a steady pace, there should then be a steady process of adjustment. And obviously, the bigger the amount of adjustment, the more drawn out that process would be. So to be absolutely clear, we don't have in mind any period of adjustment of anything like the speed and severity of what happened in 2008. So my apologies if that was unclear in our submission, because that's absolutely not what we...
Could I just quote for a second? I mean, it would require total adjustments ranging from 6 to 14 billion over the period 2023 to 2025. If you do 14 billion over a 3-year period, you get 4.666 billion per year, which is more than the average between 2008 and 2014.
So to be clear, I think in the severe scenario, which is what the 14 corresponds to, we wouldn't see that adjustment necessarily taking place by 2025. It could be spread out over a longer period. And I apologise, it may have been unclear in the document that was sent to you, but to be clear, that's absolutely not what we had in mind.
The danger here in taking the severe scenario as our most likely outcome. We actually, in the central scenario, are looking at an adjustment of 10 billion happening much further down the line when the economy is growing and near its capacity again. And that would be a third of what we saw over the financial crisis period, and taking place over a time period that's less than half the time period we saw for the previous.
But that means year on year, it's about equivalent.
I mean, year on year, it would be, in the central scenario, about 3/4 of the average adjustment. But again, it's for less than half the time we would have seen in the past.
Thanks.
And I think the average adjustment over the 2008 period, the adjustment over the 2008 period was very front-loaded. So if anyone who remembers living through that period, the degree of tightening in some periods was really very, very tight. It was really an emergency situation, and we don't think that's a particularly likely outcome. So an average over a really long period, may be misleading in terms. It might not be the easiest way of thinking about it. I think you need to think about it as being a moderate adjustment that would have it would exert a downward force on growth. But it would not be something that would disrupt the economy in the way that the fiscal consolidation did. As I said, these are in any case kind of scenarios, and exactly what the economy could stand and what will be necessary would obviously depend on the circumstances. But we think by this third phase, it should be the case that we don't need to slam the brakes on like happened last time, and that's absolutely not what we wanted to convey here.
Deputy Shanahan.